I've been watching these 4 apricots now for about 5 minutes, and you can see native bees, honeybees, flies, gnats. These trees are gonna be completely pollinated. They're gonna be pollinated by the end of the day. I mean, it's just spectacular. Hello, beautiful subscribers. It's now March 17th here, southeastern Pennsylvania, zone 7A. And today we have the long-awaited pollination video. We're gonna be looking at a lot of different fruit trees with different stages of flower development. We're gonna be looking at European pears, Japanese plums, European plums, nectarines, apricots, pluots, peaches. But first, we're gonna be looking at honeybees. Dan, the bee man from Bob's Buzzy Bees, brought me 3 colonies of bees last week. And the video starts with us looking at his bees and talking about his bees. So, this is gonna be a long one, but hang tight and hit that like button and please subscribe. Bad year. Bad winter.
It's a little chilly this morning, so when we open, I just use paper towels, especially when it's cold. You really don't need much to keep them inside. The colonies they're kind of strong, so I wanted to make sure that they weren't just kind of getting out. Not that they really would, especially once you start moving, driving, the wind kind of keeps them in. But these are just paper towels for the little ride that we had. It's a little chilly, so I don't think they're going to come out like crazy, but just so for your sake, when we open these up, they may jump out a little bit.
Yeah, it's 45 degrees right now and probably 10-mile-per-hour wind, so not ideal conditions.
It's great weather for moving bees, but once you get there, they get a little snotty.
Why is it good for moving bees?
Because they stay inside. 45 is kind of like the magic number for bees to fly. With the winds, it probably feels a little less than that, so they really don't want to come out. Excuse me. They really don't want to come out in that weather, so it kind of makes moving them on the easier side. The warmer it gets, the earlier they start to fly. I try to move them before they're flying so that no bees kind of get left behind. It's just kind of like a thing of mine.
Great, so we have 45,000 bees here?
Approximately right now, but in about 6 weeks, we'll probably have about 60,000 each, so what's that, 180,000?
Wow, exciting. All right, so he just opened up the hives. He said that's the strongest one there. And this is nothing compared to the craziness of last year. Here's a honeybee in action on the methyl plum. All right, here we can see the honeybee. We have good conditions today. It's a low wind down here. And about 65 degrees right now. And the methyl plum has been open for about 3 days now, so it's starting to push some serious nectar.
This is a good representation of the difference of the boxes. The 2 white boxes here, they're bigger, they're deep, so they're the brood boxes. That's where we were talking about earlier. That's all for the bees. So that's where the queen will lay her eggs. Under optimal conditions in the spring and summertime, she's laying anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 eggs a day. So she needs the room. And that's all for the bees. This purple box here, the purple doesn't really mean anything, it's just a color that's painted for the box. But you can tell that it's a smaller size. That's the honey supers. So what basically happens is the bees like to work out and up. So the outer frames of these deep boxes are typically where you're going to find all the resources, the honey, the pollen for the bees. The pollen is the protein portion of the bees' diet. The nectar and or honey is the sugar portion of their diet, and they use that for obviously themselves, but as well as the brood. They feed the brood throughout the different stages. We can talk about that next time when I can actually show you.
Cool. Awesome.
Oh yeah, sorry. So the only real difference is the size of the frames, and that's just for weight purposes because honey gets really, really heavy. So I'd rather be able to break it down into smaller boxes for moving the honey purposes. But that's all. The only difference between this and the frames down here is the frames down are a little bit longer.
So you'll build up the height on the boxes as the summer goes on?
Yeah, so I think like we were talking about how they had a really good they have a really good honey flow here. When we come back, we'll probably start with 2, but sooner rather than later. Once the temperatures warm up and stay consistently warm, we'll throw another 2 on.
So this honeybee can pollinate a couple hundred flowers a day, but it's doing me no good jumping from one flower on the methley to another flower on the methley. I need it to go over to the alderman or the superior or the Santa Rosa and exchange pollen from tree to tree. The Japanese plums are not self-pollinating. So when do the colonies get full strength?
So the queen lays based off of incoming food. April is really when our honey flow starts. They get on maples, skunk cabbage, end of January, early February, into March. That's probably slowing down. Then like your dandelion, your clover, the Russian olive, also known as autumn olive, kind of jumps in April. And then our real big honey flow, if we can get the nice weather, is the black locust trees.
Really?
It's like the first 2 weeks of May, generally speaking. And if I can get 2 weeks of nice weather, they'll really pack the honey in. We did pretty good last year. I think I counted about 19 days. We only had rain like 2 or 3 of them. So the petals weren't getting knocked off, and we did really well. So I'm hoping maybe we'll get lucky and get 2 years in a row.
Is there anywhere, do you have a Facebook page?
Yeah, so we're on Facebook and Instagram. Bob's Buzzy Bees.
Bob's Buzzy Bees.
Yep. Bob's B-U-Z-Z-Y Bees.
Great.
So.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, you guys can see the honeybees. They are working hard already. It's March 13th. And that's why I like Dan the bee man, because he brings me colonies early.
You should spend as much time as you possibly can with your fruit trees throughout the entire season. But, in my opinion, the springtime, while the flowers are open, is the most important time to be spending with your trees. Everybody always asks, why I didn't get any fruit, or why don't I have any fruit on my trees? And the answer to their question most likely lies during those 2-week window while the flowers were open. Okay, so behind the honeybees here, between the horses and the honeybees, you could see that I have a bunch of trees. These are European pears. And European pears are not self-pollinating. So, I have over there a moonglow, and I have Kieffers, and I have Bartlett's, and I have a few others I can't remember. We'll take a look. Here is like a Deja No, I can't pronounce it.
and a Moonglow, and a Kieffer, Bartlett, and all these European pears will not produce fruit unless they're cross-pollinated. Let's look at the difference between a younger European pear and an older European pear. And if we look at this tree, there's very little spurs. Spurs are where we are going to get flowers and going to get fruit. So you can see a couple here, couple starting to grow here. There's none yet on this entire branch. This is a younger European pear. But if we go over here, I'll show you a tree that's 3 times older. Now look at this tree. 3 times as old. 3 times as many spurs. I mean, this thing is loaded with spurs. And that just happens with age. Okay, here's a Kieffer. And I have to say that I was really impressed with how many flowers the Kieffer had at the age that this is. So, now, it dropped 75% of its fruit. Maybe 90% of its fruit. It dropped it all. But, as a pollinating partner for another pear, it's incredible. It had so many blooms on it, and the blooms were over an extended period of time. So if you're having trouble with one of your pears getting pollinated, European pear, well, actually even Asian with the Kieffer, I highly recommend this tree because it blooms, and it blooms hard. Here's the Kieffer. It's just as far along as the Moonglow. Kieffer is actually pretty early. What's cool about the Kieffer pear is that it actually will cross-pollinate with Asian pears. So I'll show you a little trick in about 2 weeks. I'll take a branch off this that's fully flowered, and I'll move it up with my Asian pears to help the pollination. Dan said there's about 15,000 bees in each one of these colonies right now. But by the middle of the summer, there'll be 60,000 bees. So this is nothing compared to what it will be come June and July.
You're probably gonna see honeybees in your backyard and on your fruit trees. And that's because they'll travel up to 5 miles to find food for the colony. So, don't be surprised if you see the honeybees.
We're looking at my plums, and this is the Methley with the lowest amount of chill hours. And you can see that a few of the flowers have even started to open. And the other ones are about to open soon. This tree is absolutely covered with flower buds though. So there's the Methley. Then we come over here and we got an alderman. At least a few days behind. I was so sick and tired of losing my fruit to the late frost that I planted European plums a few years ago, and they bloom at least 2 full weeks behind the Asian plums. So you saw how open they were. Now let's look at a green gauge. A European plum. It's just like not even close, which is great because you'll never get hit by a late frost. A Stanley. This Stanley is awesome. The buds aren't nearly as far along. And we got a Brooks. These are never gonna get hit by a late frost. And then we have a Victoria. This is cool because this is like a red plum, like a really big grape, looks like. Now, I'll be honest, European plum does not taste nearly as good as an Asian plum. So, these are what they make prunes out of. But you're gonna get fruit every single year. Never get hit by the late frost. See, there's like no buds, and then we'll come over here, look at an Asian plum. Just about ready to explode. Big difference.
So bees, they're not even attracted to the pollen. The bees are attracted to the nectar that the flower puts off. And in exchange, the pollen takes a ride on the bee. It's a way of the flower using the honeybee to transfer the pollen for reproduction. So these honeybees, they're after nectar. And sometimes I've noticed when the fruit trees just open up new flowers, they're not covered with bees. And I'll be watching the flowers, watching the trees, and I'm losing my mind. Where are the bees? The flowers are open. And I think the trees just haven't pushed the nectar yet. So be patient, because less than 24 hours or 48 hours later, you go back down there and the trees will be covered in bees. And that's because they're after the nectar. So you can see the honeybee in action. And it's jumped from flower to flower to flower. Probably 100 flowers in the last couple minutes here. But it's doing me no good, because I'll show you in a minute, none of my other plums are open right now. So I showed you footage from these trees from March 13th. About 10% of the flowers were open. And just a few days later, now 40% of these flowers are open. And they're very, very delicate light flowers. This is the Methley plum. So, unfortunately, the alderman, the superior, and the Santa Rosa, the Toca, they haven't opened yet. So, we need to get some overlap. I'm gonna show you the buds on the Santa Rosa, and we'll see they're just maybe 4 or 5 days behind the Methley. So these bees, right now, they're getting nectar for the colony. They're enjoying life, but I'm getting no cross-pollination. So really, I need the Methley to slow down, and I need that Santa Rosa to hurry up, because Japanese plums are not self-pollinating. The internet will claim they're self or partially self-pollinating, but from my experience, if these blooms do not overlap, we are not going to get hardly any fruit. The good thing is, though, we really only need 1 or 2 days of overlap, because one honeybee or one mason bee is capable of pollinating hundreds of flowers in a single day. So we just have to get a little overlap. I've been talking crap about the Methley plum in my last 3 videos, even a couple short videos, and it's time to talk about some positives. This tree produces probably the best piece of fruit on the entire farm. Close second to its cousin, the Flavor King Pluot, which is 75% Japanese plum. But if you have a fresh Methley plum, fully ripe off this tree, it'll blow your mind. It's filled with so much juice and so much sugar. It's like nothing you've ever had at the grocery store. I can't even buy plums from the grocery store anymore after eating plums off of this tree. Here's a branch I shot a few days ago for you guys on March 13th, and there was only a couple flowers open, and now you can see the majority of this branch is completely open. Okay, here are the Santa Rosa blooms. This is what the Methley looked like maybe 5 days ago. And you can see the white tips, and they're about to open. I'm hoping maybe tomorrow I'll come down and there'll be some open, but they're really close. Here's the superior plum. They're even a few days behind the Santa Rosa. So actually, I would recommend that people plant the alderman and the superior instead of the Methley and the Santa Rosa, because these two are last to bloom, it looks like, and you're going to avoid more late frost this way. Another important pollinator is the mason bee. Mason bees are actually more efficient pollinators than honeybees because they carry the pollen on their abdomen, unlike the honeybee that carries the pollen on their feet and legs. There it is, a small, tiny native bee hiding from the wind on the apricot flower. So you do not need honeybees if you have a backyard orchard, your garden, home fruit trees, whatever it is. That's because there's over 20,000 different species of bees in the world, and 4,000 of them in the United States alone. So, I'm trying to get some footage here, but I've been down here looking at this Japanese plum for about 10 minutes now, and I've seen at least 4 or 5 different native bees. This is not a honeybee and not a mason bee. This is a bumblebee. And they are incredible pollinators because their entire body carries the pollen. They're a better pollinator than the honeybee. They're all up in there, which is really a good sign. The more pollinators you have, the better. And bees aren't the only pollinators. You can have ants, butterflies, moths. You can have flies, horse flies. Even some birds can pollinate. anything that will take the pollen from one Japanese plum flower to a different Japanese plum flower. Here's another plum that's supposed to bloom late and have hardy buds. This is the elephant heart. And by the looks of it, it's gonna bloom before the superior and before the alderman. But this is another variety I'm gonna try. This is a very young tree. I planted it 2 years ago and it's having a hard time. It's not growing. This time of year is really exciting, but also really stressful. It's exciting because you get to start to see the potential that the trees have for this year. You get to see how many flowers are on the tree, and the flowers directly correlate to how much fruit you're gonna get. So it's awesome. I love this time of year. I love it as much as picking fruit. But it's also very stressful because these trees are flowering early. These 4 apricots behind me, I mean, it's mid-March and they're blooming right now. And that means I'm constantly checking the weather on my phone and hoping that we don't get any temperatures below 29 degrees or any late frost. Here's a honeybee. I'm working the Wenatchee apricot. Luckily for me and these apricots and all my friends I get fruit to, I don't see any bad weather in the next 14 days. And we're mid-March right now. So generally where I am, 30 minutes north of Philadelphia, if we can make it to April, then you're smooth sailing. So we're mid-March. I checked the weather report. March 20th and March 21st, they're talking about it going down to 31 degrees at night for a couple hours. And that should not be a problem. You don't need to worry about 31 degrees for a couple hours. You need to worry about 29 degrees and lower for an extended period of time, especially if it's windy. So the tighter the buds, the colder they can handle. And then open, delicate flowers can't handle very cold. And then once the fruit's set, they can handle a little bit more cold. But in general, you're looking for 30 degrees and below, you're gonna start to have problems. Look at these apricot flowers. I always forget every year how beautiful the apricot blooms are. Let's talk about these apricots here for a minute. Apricots actually have what's called a perfect flower. They have male and female sex parts in the same flower. That means the pollen created by the stamen doesn't have to move hardly any distance to make it in the stigma. So, really, you just need the bee to buzz around in the same flower and move the pollen half a centimeter, not even, and it will pollinate. But you will get a much bigger crop and even better fruit if the tree is cross-pollinated. So if the bee goes from the Harglow to the Mormon to the Wenatchee to the Puget Gold, you're going to get significantly more fruit, and the fruit is going to be better. You can see 2 honeybees up there in the apricot going to work. But the wind is howling. Every time the wind picks up, these bees really struggle They usually drop all the way down to the grass to get out of the wind so they don't get blown away. If you look closely, you can see that this honeybee's legs are completely covered with pollen. It can barely fly. Honeybees are just loving these apricots today. Unfortunately, the weather changed. It now looks like it might go to 27 degrees this week. And most of these apricot flowers will be destroyed, pollinated or not. This is my Arctic white nectarine. It's hard to see in the camera, but this tree is awesome. It is also starting to flower, and nectarines are like apricots. They have perfect flowers as well, so they are self-pollinating. Hopefully tomorrow I can get some footage of some bees on this tree for you guys. But this nectarine can be pollinated by my peach trees. Nectarines and peaches are the same species. So 50 yards over there, I have a red Haven peach that has open flowers right now as well. So, yes, it's self-pollinating. We don't need the red Haven, but we want the red Haven's pollen. Hopefully, we can get some honeybees, some mason bees, some fairy bees, some miners, the leaf cutter bees to go from the red Haven to the Arctic white nectarine. Wait till you see what the fruit looks like on this tree later this year. Here's the Arctic white nectarine getting pollinated by this honeybee. And yeah, they're self-pollinating. So, as long as the bee buzzes around in that one flower and moves the pollen from the stamen to the stigma, then we will be good to go. Here's a red Haven. Got big flowers for a peach tree. My other peach trees don't have flowers this big. But anyways, there's a little bee right there. It kind of looks maybe like a gnat. I just need that gnat to fly from this red Haven here over to the Arctic white nectarine. Only about 10% of the flowers are open. I mean, this thing's gonna be stunning in a few days. So we'll get some better footage of it for you when it's in full bloom. Do not plant the red Haven peach though until you have planted a couple other peach trees first, like the Contender or the Crest Haven. The red Haven has incredibly good fruit, but it's already flowering. So it's gonna get hit by a late frost most years. It's March 17th and the flowers are opening. And for a peach tree, that's early to me, because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other peaches right here, and none of their flowers are even close to opening. So yes, the red Haven may be helping the Arctic white nectarine all the way over there, even though it's pretty far for cross-pollination. But it's not doing anything to help cross-pollination with my other peach trees. I don't think that these blooms are gonna overlap at all. The Crest Haven, which tastes almost as good as the red Haven, it's gotta be 10 days behind. That's the tree we want to plant, at least first. And then once you have a couple other peach trees that bloom later, then plant the Red Haven, because you're not going to get fruit every year from this tree. These are 3 of my 4 Pluots. And Pluots are probably the best tasting fruit on the entire farm. The Methley Plum is the close second. But that's because Pluots are 75% Japanese plum, 25% apricot. So the flavor complexity is just mind-blowing when you bite into one of them. You're gonna see later this year, hopefully, a taste test. This is my Flavor Supreme. It is flowering first. The Flavor King and the Dappled Dandy are not open yet. Now it looks like the Dappled Dandy has a couple flowers open, but the Flavor King hasn't opened any flowers yet. So, since they are not self-pollinating and they're 75% Japanese plum, you can use a Japanese plum to help pollinate. So that's why I brought up this air layered branch from one of my Methley plums, and it's flowering at the same time as the Flavor Supreme. So the bees can go from here to here and back. I'm not gonna let this fruit this year if it happened, but we do need cross-pollination with Pluots. Hopefully, this Flavor King will catch up quickly and the Dappled Dandy will open soon as well. As you can see, the flowers are opening. And if I was going to redesign my orchard from the start, I would certainly plant my Pluots next to my Japanese plums, so we can get as much cross-pollination as possible. But I didn't even know about Pluots when I planted my Japanese plums, and there's no more room down there, so the Pluots are over here. But in a perfect world, you would have this tree right next to the Methley. Another thing I might do, if the Santa Rosa doesn't open up soon, is take a branch off of here and take it down and put it in a water bottle and hang it in the Methley plum, and the flowers will stay open for 7 or 10 days, and hopefully the bee will jump from the water bottle branch to the Methley plum. Here's the Flavor Supreme. You can see how far along the bloom is. And over here, we have the Flavor King. Only one flower open. And over here is the Dappled Dandy. And actually, it's catching up to the Flavor Supreme. And then we have a baby Flavor Queen. Even though they might overlap in a few days from now, if it's wet and rainy and cloudy at the same time that the blooms are out, no Pluots. I'm gonna leave you guys with a beautiful shot of one of my apricot trees. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I'm gonna be showing more pollination videos later when we have the pears and the apples flowering. But for now, thanks for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.